Well, I want to welcome everyone to this inaugural webinar for Project Gains. Project Gains is a new initiative from the American Mathematical Association of two-year colleges, geared at helping two-year college students, college and university students, and graduate students navigate the process, as well as just consider the option of teaching mathematics at a two-year college. So this webinar is all about community college teaching. And so we want to welcome Ann Dudley, who is the Executive Director for AMATIC, and of course, Kate Kozak, who is the current President of AMATIC. So I will go ahead and turn the time over to them. And again, we welcome you and we're glad you're here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Dudley, as Laura said, and I taught at Glendale Community College, which is in Phoenix, Arizona, for 30 years. And after I retired, I took on the job that I'm in now, which is the Executive Director of AMATIC, the American Mathematical Association of two-year colleges. And my colleague Kate will introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Catherine Kozak, or Kate Kozak. I teach at Coconino Community College in Flagstaff, Arizona. Though we're both in Arizona, we're very different parts of Arizona, and we have different characters of our colleges. I have been teaching here for 26 years, and I am the president of AMATIC, as Laura mentioned. So we want to talk about, why do we teach at a community college? So Anne, can you tell us why you taught at a community college?
So first, let me say that, yeah, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. I see some questions coming in the chat. Laura's going to field the chat if there are questions and answer them as she can. And we are recording. And yes, we'll have an email so we can share things with you. So why do I teach at a community college? I actually started my college career at a community college. And after being there for a couple of years trying to figure out what I wanted to do, it finally occurred to me that I wanted to teach at a community college. And so then I went down the path to become a teacher at a community college as a result of being a student there. And so Kate, why did you become a teacher at a community college?
So when I went to college, I actually was a physics major and a math major. And then I finally decided to go get my master's in mathematics. At the time, I wasn't a graduate teacher and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my mathematics degree. But I ended up in my second year of college, my master's program, I actually became a teacher as a graduate assistant. And I really enjoyed it. And I liked doing it so much. And I thought, well, I'd like to keep doing this for my career in mathematics. And at the time in Flagstaff, a new community college, my community college, was just forming as I was finishing my master's. And so I started teaching for them part-time, and I realized how much I enjoyed helping those students and being there for the students at that point. I find the students are very different than at a university, and I really like interacting with them. So now that we know why we've done that, we want to talk a little bit more about our community college teaching and what it's like. And I'm going to have Anne talk about her classroom environment that she has. And when we talk about classroom environment, we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about our students and our teaching modalities and our technology. So Anne?
So as I start this, I'm going to launch a poll and ask how many of you have already taught a course. So here comes a poll your way. Have you taught a course? Have you ever had the opportunity to be a teacher? Doesn't have to be math, but teaching of some kind. We're interested in sort of, I guess, is the answer for those of you who've maybe been a teacher assistant and worked in a classroom like that, where you're, all right, looks like you all have answered. So let me end the poll. Oh, someone switched to sort of right at the moment. Here are the results. So can you see those?
Okay.
So it looks like most of you have been in the classroom already. Some of you not, and one a sort of. I was a sort of. I graded papers and worked with a teacher for quite a while before I actually taught my own class. So
And as an
classroom
undergrad, I
environment,
want to say, and real fast, as an undergrad, I taught physics labs. So I was a physics lab and grader there. So I sort of also as an undergrad did that.
it's sort of too. So we've all come to teaching through sort of maybe and then teaching. So classroom environment in the community college in general, our classrooms are smaller than university classrooms. At the college I was at, we always had around 35 students in the classroom. It was a pretty traditional classroom for years. Of course, COVID changed everything. We all know that. Our students had access to technology, but they didn't all have the full gamut of technology. And we taught pretty much traditionally in my college, although there were occasional teachers who did a lot of collaborative learning or maybe a flipped classroom. But overall, if you looked at my college, we did a lot of traditional teaching, which doesn't really mean always standing at the front and lecturing. It's engaging students, but in a more traditional sort of fashion. And so we'll let Kate talk about her classroom.
So again, the same thing with Anne, our classroom. Now, my college and my students are a little bit different than Anne's students. We have, for our classroom environment, we have, again, smaller classes, but I can have a class right now. Currently, I'm teaching 7 students in a Calc 3 class. But I also have another class that has 24 students in it. So we have different things we can go on with that and what kind of students we would see. My school is a Hispanic serving institution. We also are a Native American teaching student institution, serving institution. Used to be that our school had the highest % of Native American students, more than besides a tribal college. So we have a lot of students that come from different walks of life and different students you see all over the place. Technology wise, we've actually been pretty much a lot of technology in some of our classrooms. We've always had, in all of our math classrooms, we have smartboard technology in them. We have, one of our math classrooms has computers in there, so we can have computerized things going on. Not computerized classrooms per se, where students are just doing things on a computer, but we can do different activities on the computers. We can have MATLAB on our computers. We can have our studio on our computers and so forth in our classes. We've also always been one where we would have an online presence classes. So classes that are only online. We've had classes that are only in person. We've also had what used to be called ITV, which was where you would sit and teach on one campus, and there would be students on other campuses that would be feeding into your campus and be able to listen to what you're doing. I actually taught a class one time where I was teaching in Flagstaff at the Lone Tree campus, and I was beaming my class to the Williams campus and beaming my classes to the Page campus. So I had students on 3 different campuses at the exact same time listening to me. Nowadays, we think of that as Zoom. So nowadays, we actually do that with Zoom. And my school, because of COVID, has learned that we can actually offer just in-person face-to-face classes, just online classes, asynchronous, and then just Zoom synchronous classes. So they're still virtual, but they're at the same time taught through Zoom. So that's kind of what mine looks like, my classroom environment. Our department expectations are also very different depending on where you're teaching. Again, my school is much smaller than Anne's school. So we have 7 full-time math faculty and about 40 full-time faculty here on campus. So in my school, my departmental expectation is to have, we would be on more committees than probably other schools would have, just because there's fewer faculty that would be involved. We would be on, we actually at one point where we didn't have a department chair. And so everybody in the department would pick up the pieces that a department chair would normally do. Somebody was doing scheduling, somebody else was doing assessment, somebody else was in charge of evaluating the part-time faculty, somebody else was involved in picking our textbooks. We now have what's called a lead faculty who does a lot of that, but we're still involved in all those pieces. We're right now in the process of updating our what I can't remember what it's called now, sorry. It's not our strategic plan, but kind of like that, where we're looking at what's happening and what's going on in the department. We're doing assessments. So even though we have it now, basically a lead faculty who does a lot of that stuff for us, we still are expected to do much of it. But I know at Ann School, things were a little different.
So Kate, you can press enter one more time and we'll get the subheader there.
Okay.
So we're trying to talk to you a little bit about what are your responsibilities beyond teaching. I thought maybe I'd back up a minute first and say a normal community college professor teaches 15 credit hours a semester. So that means you're in the classroom 15 hours a week, basically. In addition to that, you're expected to hold an office hour at my college, one every day. So that's 5 more hours a week that you're expected to be available to meet with students. And some of that time is spent in our student learning center. We call ours the Math Solution. And so I had to spend 1 or 2 days a week down in the Math Solution, which again, reaches towards students rather than sitting in your office hours. In addition to that, I had lots of committees I was on. I was required to be on one, but more as needed. And I taught as part of a big district. I was part of the Maricopa district in Phoenix, which has 10 branches. And so we had some committees that actually met across the district. And I was on several of those committees where I met with members from all across the district. And that was in the days before Zoom. So a lot of driving was involved. But so that were some of my responsibilities beyond teaching. There's also sort of other responsibilities that come around sort of annually. We talk about adopting new textbooks. And so there's always a textbook committee that gets together and tries to figure out what textbook to adopt. Other issues come up that you form pop-up committees that work on. What did we leave out, Kate? Any other responsibilities, departmental expectations beyond?
Not really, but I will mention that at my school, we are required to also have 5 office hours a week, but we don't have to do them every day. So we don't have to have 1 a day. We just have to have 5 a week. With Zoom now, some of us are now having them as Zoom office hours. So our students could actually come into them through Zoom.
Yeah.
We don't require our faculty to go down and sit in our learning center or tutoring center. But we do have some of our faculty have decided to actually meet in their classroom so that they figure the students are going to be coming in there soon. So half an hour before the classroom, they're in there to help students. Everybody has a different way of doing things. We also are sometimes on hiring committees. So we also are trying to figure out who we want to hire. So we would have a committee that would be on that. And it's not, your hiring committee may not be for a math person. I'm sometimes on hiring committees for a tutor or the director. I was actually on the hiring committee for our vice president of academic affairs one time. So you can be on different types of hiring committees around the college. And so that, I think that's one of the other things that we do a little differently.
Yeah.
And also a little different also is we don't have textbook, like I don't have a textbook committee at my school because we only have 7 people in the department. So we all just kind of sit together and we talk about which one to go, but there are different schools that do different things.
So let's take a pause and see if there are any questions and any thoughts anybody has. And, we meant to ask this poll early on and I forgot to launch it. So I'll send it out now while you're thinking if you have a question. Has anybody ever attended a community college? Let's see how many of you guys know the community college environment. So you can see that Kate didn't go to a community college before she worked at one, and I started at a community college. So we are there. All right, you guys are fast. Poll done. Let me share the results with you.
Wow, so some of you actually did go to community college at one point. That's wonderful.
So you kind of know the environment we're talking about. You know how it's just slightly different than university level environment. There are pros and cons to both. And so next we're going to talk a little bit about campus character. And it's important to know when you're looking, if you're going to go and teach at a community college, that each campus has a little bit different character. And in my college, where there's 10, in my district, where there's 10 different campuses, there are actually different flavors at each of the campuses. We have one campus where they're just totally into collaborative learning and everybody teaches the collaborative learning style and they're all everybody who works there has to have that kind of philosophy or they don't really fit in. And we have another campus that's totally open resources, and that's their big driving thing is they don't want to use textbooks. They want to use open resources. They want to make everything as cheap as possible for their students. And that's their driving character. And so we actually allow faculty to move from campus to campus to find a place to fit in. So when you are thinking about going to a community college and working for a community college, it's important that you not only look at, how many teachers are there. My college had 35 faculty, full-time math faculty, and over 100 adjuncts. So size is important, but also character is important. And Kate's character on her campus is totally different than what we have down in Maricopa.
So we are actually one community college, and we actually have at this moment 2 campuses and one what we call a learning center, though it may become a campus here in a little bit. And so 2 of our campuses are actually in Flagstaff. The 3rd campus or learning center is actually in the Page campus, which, if you know anything about Arizona, Page, Arizona is 2.5 miles north of Flagstaff and about, I don't know, a couple of thousand feet lower than Flagstaff. So it's a long drive to get from the Flagstaff campus to the Page campus. And even from the Flagstaff campus, the Lone Tree campus to the 4th Street campus, it's a fairly good distance. So, well, not huge distance. Flagstaff's not a big town, but we have to sometimes travel between the 2. And we have people that teach on both campuses, sometimes by choice and sometimes by that's just what classes are available. And we actually did have a faculty member, not in math, but in a different area, that actually would go teach on Friday a class on the Page campus. So even though he was mostly teaching in the Lone Tree campus, he would drive once a week to Page to teach a class up there in person. And that might happen to where you have to do that and go and do those kind of driving around. I've never gotten the chance to teach at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, which I would love to do, but I haven't gotten that chance yet. But you never know, you might be able to, because the bottom of the Grand Canyon actually happens to be part of our district. So we can actually have classes that teach down there.
That'd be a great geology and math class. There
yes,
we go.
It would be. And we actually had a geology of the Grand Canyon class once that I took.
There you go.
So, and at my school, we don't have the different kind of we're an OER campus or we're this kind of campus or that. So we do a little bit differently where we allow our teachers to kind of do what they want in their classes. A couple of us are very much into doing more inquiry-based learning in our classes. A couple of us are more traditional lectures and then do some group work. A couple of us are more we're all kind of into the idea of OERs. And so you really want to find out what fits for you and what doesn't fit for you when you come to a school and what works.
Yeah.
But we have all these different things that can go on. And when you apply, you might want to look at that.
Exactly.
I did see somebody posted in here that they wanted to teach at a community college because of their teacher they had at a community college. And we love hearing stories like that.
Yeah.
It always makes us feel so happy.
Right. That's actually what got me to teach, is my calculus teacher at Phoenix College just was so good. And I just sat there and watched him and said, I can do what he does. I want that job. So exactly. So we thought we'd move on a little bit and talk about how to go about getting a job at a community college and what do you need to do to make you shine when all the other applicants are out there. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what looks good on a resume. And we're going to start with right to the specific job description. So we all post job descriptions and it has a list of things we're looking for. And if you don't write a paragraph about each of those things we're looking for, then you're not going to step out from the crowd. So there's a reason every bullet point is on that job description. And so you need to write a paragraph, at least 1 or 2 sentences to each one of those. The people who apply for the jobs and don't put that information in their cover letter end up not ranking as high in our ranking system. We have a full rubric that we follow in my college, and you have to rank, and we're sitting there looking for specific information. And so you need to take that opportunity. It may be in your resume, but it may be buried in your resume. It really helps us who are looking to hire you to have it outlined in your cover letter. That's the purpose of your cover letter. You need to address every single point in that job description.
And one of the things I want to point out is that we've actually had people that have worked for us as part-time faculty. That's what we call them. We don't call them adjuncts at my school. We call them part-time faculty, and they've taught for us in the past. And they think, oh, well, they know me. I don't need to put this in here because they know that about me. But when we look at that job description, we look at your resume, we're looking at just that. We can't use any prior knowledge of you. So if it's not in there, we can't rank you on it. So you may be teaching, like we've had people who teach at Coconino Community College, and one of the things we put on our job description is we want somebody who is used to a diverse student body. And so somebody who teaches at Coconino has that diverse exposure to diverse student body because of just where we are and our demographics, but they don't put it down. So we can't give them any points for it because they didn't put it down. And really, we do the same thing, and as we have a large matrix that we use and gives certain points for everything. And the higher points are, then those are the people that get interviews. And if you don't have high points, you won't get an interview. You won't get past that stage. You want to sell yourself with this.
Exactly. So someone's asked, what's resume or a CV, a curriculum vitae? To us, they're very similar things. I always called mine a CV.
Right.
What you call yours, Kate? Resume when I
called it a
started
CV.
30 years ago, but a vita recently. So we don't see that as much different. It certainly should have all the standard things in it, you know, your education, your background, courses you've taught, things like that. So I don't see a difference. Do you see a difference, Kate?
I don't see a difference, except that I think a CV, which is normally what I call them also, so we probably should update this at some point to call it that. But I think most people who are new, I wouldn't know what a CV was when I applied. But I think of a CV as going more deeper than a resume. I remember in high school, you were taught a resume should be 1 page. A CV should not be 1 page. A CV should be much longer than that. It should have on there what's your teaching experience, what's your education experience, what presentations have you done, what committees have you served on, what organizations do you belong to. So it kind of would have all that information. So that's where I think it's a little bit more than a resume, but I consider them kind of the same thing too.
Thanks for the question. That was a good question.
Yes.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Kate. We're looking for more because we're looking for involvement, and that's
Right.
what demonstrate is. So I'll take the first one, you take the next one. So your
Okay.
awareness of current trends in math education. Today, if you come in and you don't talk about the current trends, and what do I mean by that? OER is big now, flipped classrooms. What do you talk about, Kate? Other things.
Inquiry-based learning.
Inquiry-based learning. There's, you know, if you don't mention some of those things, then we're going to go, wait a second, where has this person been? Aren't they aware of what's going on in math education today? If you don't mention that you've taught a class on Zoom, because we all went to Zoom during COVID, these are the things we're looking for when we're looking to hire someone.
I would also say that if you're using any kind of technology in your classrooms, and when I mean technology, we're not talking graphing calculators anymore, but other types of technology. And if you're doing any kind of using a learning management system, we love to see that.
Yeah.
So those are things we like to look at. Give me 1 second. So go on to the next one, go fast down.
Oh, Laura jumped in and said, if you wrote a thesis or a dissertation or any other papers, it should be on a CV as well. Exactly. And active and collaborative learning. That's right. And some people argue about the difference of the definitions of those two things. So you can play that game too. Knowledge or use of technology, that should definitely be in there. If you, even knowing the Google package, Google Sheets, Google Docs, Google Presentation, all that, you certainly want to make sure that you put that down as some knowledge that you have. Everything. Desmos is big now. Do you know Desmos? Are you using it? Anything else that you're using?
And if you know any kind of other, I know I have used Snapchat. So if you use anything like a Snapchat or such like that, we have smart boards on my campus. So if you have knowledge of the smart boards, if you know how to use those, we also use our studio for our stats classes. So that kind of information would be very useful. And one thing it shows is not that you know all these projects, but you're willing to learn them. And so showing that you have this ability to learn new stuff is really what's useful here.
Exactly.
I do want to mention before we go on to the next one, I do want to mention also is that my school makes you fill out an application and then attach the resume. And it seems like some of the application stuff is similar to what your resume is, but it really isn't, because some of the application stuff, they ask things like, do you know Word? Like, I don't care if you know the program Word, because we don't use Word that often in my school, but that's something they ask everybody who applies to the college. So realize that the application that you fill out for the school you're going to is not really what most the people who are on the hiring committee look at. But also we want to know, again, this idea of knowledge and use of alternative forms of instruction. Are you knowledgeable of the idea of doing more active learning in your classrooms? Especially any of the research that's out there on there. Now, community college teachers are not expected to do research. That's one of the things we didn't mention back when we were talking about this. We're not ones that actually spend time doing research, but you can do research and you still should know what's out there in research. You should know what's going on. You should know about co-requisites. Co-requisite education is big right now. And what you should be doing with those and what's happening with those. So those are also very important things to know. And it lets people know that you know about this, you're up on these ideas.
And I'll toss in that you don't have to be an expert on it.
Right.
That it helps that you've heard the vocabulary word and you're like, well, I've heard about that, but I'd like to find out more, is perfectly acceptable to say. It's
Right.
better than I've never heard of that. What the heck is that?
Right. I totally agree with Ann on that.
Yeah.
We also, go ahead, Ann, sorry.
No, go ahead. You got it.
I was going to say, we also don't want somebody who's going to fit in with us. So if you are somebody who knows this really, really well, we're like, well, are you going to come in and be telling us what we have to do, or coming in collaborating with us? So those are some of the things you want to look for.
So I'm going to ask you guys another question. We got another poll for you. Teaching philosophy. Do you have a teaching philosophy? Yes, no, and what the heck is that? Oh, I got answers from everybody, so I will end the poll.
Let's see what they said.
73% of you have teaching philosophies.
Oh, it didn't come up. And it didn't come up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to hit the share results button. I forgot. I have to end and then share.
So 73% of you actually have one, which is really, really impressive, as Ann says. 18% of you want to know what the heck it is. So I think we need to go with what the heck it is. Even though 73% say you have one. I have to admit, go ahead, Ann.
Yeah. So I wonder, did you guys have to write it as a project for a class, or anyone to give me further information in the chat? Because I will tell you that when I was hired 30 years ago, teaching philosophies didn't exist. That was not something we talked about. I mean, we all had them sort of, but we never crystallized them into writing down our teaching philosophies. Oh, Laura's telling us we're going to have a teaching philosophy webinar in February. Yay. Well, that's good. So I didn't know what a teaching philosophy was, except, of course, I sort of had one. I had internalized it. And then I would say for the past maybe 10 years, Kate, has it been 5 to 10 years? People have been sending in their teaching philosophy as we look at hiring packets. And now we're starting to ask for teaching philosophies. So that's going on. Oh, good. I'm getting some answers. Yeah. Required for high school teacher positions. Oh, so we borrowed this from the high schools.
Okay.
Aha.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Huh. Interesting. So,
So, yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna
I'll
say,
let
I
you-
don't have one either. I never actually had to have one. I've seen them now showing up and it's like, I have to admit, I don't know if I could actually write down what my philosophy is. I know how I teach, but I don't know if what I could put down. I know
But
I
we
don't.
recommend that you do some learning because
I know
it-
for a little bit of my teaching philosophy, I actually do not like doing these things like this on Zoom because this isn't how I teach. I teach by asking my students questions and expecting answers, or I give them activities for them to work on in class and I just walk around the classroom. So I guess that's my teaching philosophy is I want my students involved in their learning and what's going on in the classroom, but I've never had to write it down. So I wish you luck.
I think we both agree on that, Kate, that standing and, well, we're not standing, but sitting and talking like this is very unusual for us. So we're trying to get you involved, and I'm glad to see that you're chatting away in the chat because that helps.
And I've been told by Laura to come to the webinar in February. Well, maybe I will do that and write my own one down.
All right. Then we'll know how to write a teaching philosophy, but I'm retired. I'm not coming in February. I'm done.
And I'm not going to leave my job. I like where I am, but it's not a bad idea to figure out what your teaching philosophy is, even if you're not thinking of leaving your job.
Yeah.
But we want to talk about now, let's say you've got your resume, they've gone through the process of figuring out who they're going to interview. And my school tries to do about 5 to 7 people that come through the first round of what we call matrixing, where we look through a rubric and decide based on point value what somebody is. And sometimes it's a little bit before, about 5 to 7, depending on where we think the cutoff is. Or if there's somebody that we know we'd like to put in there and their number is just so far down, we need to have everybody whose number is above that in there because you have to be fair to everybody. But let's say you got that and you've got an interview. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what those interviews look like.
So before you do that, let me back up just a minute and say that there are several kinds of interviews that might happen. Sometimes we've interviewed all of our, well, not all of our candidates, our narrowed down list. And we've interviewed everybody on phone with 2 questions in order to make the pot even smaller that we want to bring in person. So you might get a phone interview as round 1 interview. And then today it might be a Zoom interview instead of a phone interview. And then a handful would be asked to come on site for an in-person interview. And then there might be a 3rd round of interviews, or it may be part of your 2nd round, where you do what's called a microteach. So there's lots of stages to the interview process, and each college does it slightly different. But be aware that there could be different ways that you might be interviewed.
And I agree with them. We start, normally at my school, we start with the phone interviews. So I should have said it this way. We get ourselves down to about 5 to 7 people that we do a phone interview with. And then from there, we usually, and again, every school is different. We usually try to get ours down to 3 or 4, depending on how many positions we're interviewing for, 3 to 4 people to interview. And that would be hopefully an in-person interview on campus. The reason I say hopefully is we actually hired 2 people in 2020. So we had to do their phone interview, which was actually on Zoom. And then we did their in-person interview, which was also on Zoom. So we never got to actually meet these 2 people that we ended up hiring in person. And we interviewed all the people over Zoom. Not the best way to do things, but it worked out for them and it worked out for us. We really liked them. They fit in nicely.
Yeah. I would say the big disadvantage of doing all the interviews by Zoom is you, the interviewee, doesn't get a chance to come on campus and get a feel for the college. And that's really important if you're thinking about spending your life teaching there. It's really important that you get on campus and you get the feel of the students and the college and the population. So that's what you miss out on, I think, on Zoom.
Yes, and so we actually do that when we bring them on campus. We have the interview with the committee. We then have them have a tour of the campus.
Yeah.
We then, as Ann said, have the microteach, where we'll talk about here in a little bit what that is. And then we actually have them meet with the provost and possibly the president of the college. Now, we call him a provost at my school. Other people's provosts are above the president. At my school, the provost is below the president. It depends on what people call them. And we had to ask, when we found out we were getting a provost, we had to ask, what is a provost? And nobody would have gave me a good answer for that. So I can't tell you what they are. But our vice president of academic affairs became a provost of academic affairs. So he would get an interview with you, and possibly our president would get an interview with you. And so there's not just an interview with just the committee, there's a lot more interview from that.
So Kate, when you bring your people in, do you pay for them to come in?
We pay for them to come. We have a small
Yeah.
amount of money we give them. And if you are the top candidate and you turn us down, we don't pay for you.
Oh, interesting.
We won't
We don't-
reimburse you.
My district doesn't pay for anyone to come in, so you have to come in on your own nickel, which is challenging.
Right.
So, all
Yeah,
right, let's
we
go on
will-
to the questions.
Yeah. So we will pay for people to come in, but if you turn us down and we wanted you, then we don't pay for you. So let's talk about the questions.
Let's just put all these up and we'll just bump
Okay.
through them pretty quickly. So there might be, when we interview people, we may have general knowledge questions of community college, just the kind of questions that might help us make sure that you understand you're coming to a community college and that you don't think you're going to be doing research and guiding graduate students through their career, just to make sure that you understand the community college, what we are.
Right. And we want to make sure that you understand kind of what community college you're also applying to. So if you want to be able to teach only calculus, well, that would be very difficult at my campus because we only have the 3 calculuses, only them once a semester. So you've already used up not even your whole area. So we want to make sure that you're willing to teach anything from arithmetic, which we used to teach, but I think it's now not called arithmetic, but pretty much beginning pre-algebra through differential equations, and have that able to be teaching that and be okay with the fact that you could be teaching beginning algebra one class time, and the next class you're teaching is Calc 1, and being able to understand that that could be the type of students you're dealing with and the changes that are happening. So one of the things I also suggest you do is that if you do get this interview, you want to not just general knowledge of the college, but the one you've applied for. So make sure you've looked over the website of the school where you're going to. Make sure you have an understanding of who you're coming into. What we hate hearing, because we always ask people, why do you want to work at Coconino Community College? And I'll get people say, well, I love Flagstaff. And that's like the worst thing we want to hear, because we don't want people who want to come here because of the town. We want people who want to come here because of who we are as a college. So make sure you look at that, because it's not just going to be about the community college itself, but your specific one. I'm sure in Maricopa, if you want to work at Glendale Community College, but you know more about Scottsdale Community College, it's not going to get you the same feel as if you knew more about Glendale. And same with other places.
Yeah. And then pedagogical knowledge, you should have some knowledge of how to teach adult students. These are adult students. And the population as well. So Kate has a population of Native Americans at her college. I have Hispanic students at Glendale. And so you need to have a knowledge of how to work with adult learners. It's part of how we reach students. You need to have mathematical knowledge. So there'll be some questions just testing your mathematical knowledge. You know, do you know, I don't have a question for you. I'm sorry, I didn't write one down, but just, is your mathematical knowledge there? And then there is pedagogical content knowledge, and that is, do you know how to explain something mathematical that students have a lot of trouble with? This is the kind of thing where you've had enough students ask you about division by zero that you finally have some good ways to explain division by zero, so that when a student gets stuck with that idea and they don't understand your first explanation, you can explain to them again, well, here's why we can't divide by zero. And so you have several techniques up your sleeve for how to explain ideas. So those kinds of questions will all pop up in the interview phase. And so that's how you know what to expect when you're getting to an interview. And then there's the Microteach.
So I want to talk a little bit about the mathematical knowledge and the
Go ahead.
pedagogical content knowledge. One of the things we may do is ask you a question of how would you explain this concept to your students? How would you explain how to add two rationals together. That first off makes us see, do you understand what a rational is and how you add two rational together? So that gets you your mathematical knowledge. But also, we might ask it in such a way where we want to see, can you explain that differently? So I've actually had a student where the student could not understand how I was doing this process. I think it was factoring. And the student could not understand the whole idea of factoring and what it meant to do that. And even though the rest of the class did, I didn't want to leave this one student away. So I had to come up with a different way to explain to her what was happening with factoring. And it helped everybody else in the class, helped it more, but you had to have 2 or 3 different ways of explaining things just in one classroom. So that's kind of what Anne was talking about. So let's talk about this Microteach.
So in the Microteach, you'll be given a topic ahead of time. I think almost everybody gives you the topic ahead of time. And what they're expecting in the 30 to 40 minutes, whatever amount of time they give you, is a real representation of what you would do in your classroom during that time. They're not expecting a condensed lesson. They're not expecting something different than what you do. So if you mostly do some group work and some collaborative activities, then that's what you should do in the Microteach. But the Microteach should also be like a star performance. You've had time to think about this topic. It should be really, really good. And so if you come in and you're underprepared, that really looks bad. So be prepared, but do it the way you would do it. So if you'd interact with the students, then interact with the committee the way you would as though they were students.
Yes, we actually had a person who applied one time for a job, and he said, well, this is what I would do if I was teaching this class. And it's like, no, we want to see what you actually do, not telling us what you would do. You want to treat them as if they're students. And I should mention at my school, our Microteach invites everybody at the college to come watch. So there could be not math people in that room. And we've actually had it to where sometimes our advisors will show up to these interviews to see, how does this person teach? What's this person gonna be like? So you can't assume everybody in the room knows your area, that area. And I should also mention that our committee, and I should have mentioned this a while ago, the committee that you're hiring with won't always be all math people. At my school, we want some of our math faculty on it, and we try to get all of us, but sometimes they balk at that a little bit. But we also have our deans on it, an HR representatives on it, somebody not in faculty are on it, like we had an advisor who was also on our hiring committee. So you can't assume everybody in that room teaches mathematics and understands mathematics.
Yeah.
And we actually wanted to hire this one guy because the person who was not a math person said, well, I understood it when he was teaching this concept. And usually the Microteach is the same thing for each teacher, each candidate. So everybody has to teach what a function is. So we can actually compare and contrast how you're doing compared to how somebody else does it.
And yes, Samson, the topic is usually given ahead of the interview. It's definitely given ahead. And what Kate said is very true, is if someone manages to explain that topic so that the HR, the human resources person in the room gets it, then that's high marks, because that person's been dropped into the middle of a math curriculum and is expecting to understand something. And if a teacher comes in and they can explain it in a way that a non-math person can understand it, then wow, that moves it way up in the markings.
Right.
Yeah. Any questions about the Microteach? I saw anything else? All right.
And I would say that you want to interact with your students. You don't want, because these days we really don't want somebody who just lectures.
No.
So you don't want to just be standing up there at the board or whatever they have you in front of and doing it without having some kind of interaction with everybody else. So I would also suggest that you should also, if you like a certain technology you want to use, you should ask, hey, will I have access to this technology when I go to do my Microteach? Because sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't. So you need to make sure you understand that before you come in.
And then at the end of every interview, they always say, do you have any questions for the committee? So what questions should you ask? Well, the worst thing you can do is not ask a single question. You should at least have one question ready.
And it could be something as simple as, what's the next step in the process? So you can ask the question about, where are we going? What do I do now? When will I know what's happening? You could also ask the question, ask them, what's it like to teach here? Because remember, the interview is not just about us finding out if we like you. It's also you finding out if you like that school. So you want to also be able to ask questions to see how well you'll fit with the people at that school and see, oh, do I want to work here? Yes, I may get the job, but I may not want the job because I might want to work somewhere else. And if you get 2 or 3 offers, then you got to be able to figure out which one do you want to have. So this is your chance to find out more about that. Are you interested in, I want to teach statistics. What's my chances of teaching that? If I'm never going to get to teach statistics at the school, then I may not want to teach at that school. So you want to ask these kind of questions. You want to ask, how do you pick out who teaches what classes? How do you assign the teaching loads? What is your load? Because I know there are some schools that don't have you teach 15 hours. I don't know anyway. I would love to know where they are because I don't know them, but there might be some that don't let them.
Maybe the other side of that, Kate, is will it be expected to teach an overload? Because more often than not, there are colleges that expect you to teach more than your 15 hours.
Right. And you get paid for overloads, but you may not want to teach an overload if you don't want to. Or you might also ask, is it a possibility to teach an overload? Because some schools may not have the overload ability for you. So these are all questions you should think about asking when you go into the interview. So plan those ahead of time. Think about what those would be before you walk in there.
And I think it goes without saying, don't be late for your interview. Dress appropriately. All these things. Kate and I over the years have seen interviewees who showed up 20 minutes late or came in their casual clothes. And it's like, you need to be professional about this. You could be casual after you're hired, but there's a level of professional we expect at the interview process.
I also want to make the comment that when they do take you on a tour of the campus, which most likely they will do that, realize that you're still being interviewed on that walking around. So don't say things that you don't want the committee to hear about.
There's a story there, Kate. There's a story there.
Well, yeah, I was interviewing for a job one time, and the dean was actually taking me to the next place. It wasn't a campus interview, a campus tour. I had already done that, and I was fine on that. But he was taking me to another interview I had, and he asked me. He said, "Oh, I shouldn't be telling you this, but you did a really good job." And I said, "Well, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I will say the salary is a bit of an issue." And that should never have been come out of my mouth at that point, because that was not a good step. So remember that no matter what, you're always, when you're interacting with those people on campus, you are being interviewed the whole time. Okay.
All right. I think we should wrap it up and give some chance for questions. So once again, you have our emails. You certainly can write to us if you have any further questions. We're both available. Any questions?
That's my work email, but you can also email me at amatic. It's just the same as my Catherine.kozak@amatic.org. So either one works. Yeah, I'm not seeing any more in the chat. But please feel free to unmute and ask questions if you have any.
Thank you all for coming. It was great.
Yeah.
We hope you learned a little something.
I will say that teaching at a community college has been the best thing I've ever wanted to do. And I will also say one of the things that we didn't get to talk about is the differences. I'm actually known well on my campus. I'm somebody people come and ask questions about. The math department here at the college is very involved in the leadership of the college. And so if you want to get into those leadership roles, you have the ability to at a community college, where you may not as much in a university. Also, you don't need to have a doctorate to work at a community college. And I know at a university, if you don't have a doctorate, sometimes they don't give you as much respect. Whereas in the community college, we're all on the equal levels. And that's what I love about it also. But I just love the students. To me, that's
Yeah.
the reason I teach here is because I just love those students.
So Chong has a question.
Yeah. So Amatic actually has on their website, and I'm going to put in the chat.
We do have a job board, so some
job board.
colleges do advertise with Amatic, so you can always go there. But what you really need to do is find colleges you want to go to and find out where they post their jobs.
Right.
And usually, I assume they do Maricopa does this. If you're interested in a job, you can get to their website, find out where it is, and you can leave an email, and then you'll get an email when there's a job posted. Laura says, go to Inside Higher Ed. Those post jobs, but not everywhere. There's no one website for every community college opportunity.
Right.
The best thing is to decide where you want to go teach and find out where they post their jobs. Yeah.
I will say that sometimes what I've done is I've actually posted on just Google math jobs and seen what comes up.
Yeah, there you go.
And you can find jobs through that also.
Yep.
And one thing I will say is if you're applying to multiple places, make sure that your application is geared towards the place you're actually interviewing for and that you're applying for. Because you can tell when you're reading these things if somebody applied to 20 different schools and you're just one of the 20. And that doesn't get you very high up. So make sure even if you're trying to apply to 20 different places, try to resist copying and pasting. Yes, try to resist doing
and if
that.
you're going to copy and paste, please make sure you take out the old school name before you
Yes,
apply to the new school.
We've seen lots of that.
We
over
see
the
lots
years.
of that. It's not good.
And it's not going to get you an interview. So it's usually not the obvious thing.
We all understand.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Thank you.
Yeah, so Laura mentions make sure you ask somebody to proofread your applications. That's a great idea.
Absolutely.
And we hope to see you in the future in community college teaching. I would be remiss to say that it would be wonderful if you became a member of Amatic. We do actually have a graduate student membership to become members of it. And it actually is good to put on your resume that you're a member of a national organization. So I would highly suggest, as president, I really want to highly suggest you become a member of Amatic.
And then once you get that job at the community college, that you come to the Amatic annual conferences.
Right. And you
support
continue
the
to be a
organization.
member.
There you go.
Because that's how we improve our teaching, is coming to our annual conferences.
That's right.
What you want to do, once you get that job, you have to find a way to keep that job. So thank you all for coming. Please email us if you have any other questions.
Oh, thank you all. We enjoyed sharing with you guys. All right.
Bye-bye.
Good job. Bye-bye, y'all.
You could probably stop recording now.
Okay, I will stop recording.